Welcome back to the shop. Thanks for coming by. Today we're going to do something a little bigger and a lot more fun. We're going to chop up this trailer and move this axle. That's right. Today we're going to start a whole new project. As you know, most of the country is on lockdown, but I still wanted to keep stuff moving. So I wanted to find a project that I already had parts and supplies and stuff here for, and this is it. Let's take a closer look at this thing.
So I got this trailer from a friend of mine, and it's been sitting in his backyard rotting for years. He got tired of looking at it, and I'm always a sucker for something free, so I decided to take it off his hands. After looking it over, I really liked how it was built, and I like that it uses full-size car tires. So I decided that this was going to replace my current motorcycle and utility trailer, which is kind of small and a bit flimsy. I also did some custom work to my current trailer to make it fit the bike better, but this new trailer is a much better base to start with. I like this trailer, I like how it's built, but as you can see, there is some work to be done here. As it often is when treated lumber is bolted to steel, there's a lot of rust here and a lot of age. None of it is structurally threatening to the trailer, but it all does need to be taken care of.
Like I said, I think this is a well-built trailer. There's no shoddy welds anywhere, there's no skimps on thin material anywhere, or any kind of sketchiness like that anywhere on this trailer. But it does have one pretty fatal flaw, and that is that the center line of the axle itself, is way too far forward. I actually measured it out, and the center line of the axle here is in the front half of the trailer by about 2 full inches. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a big problem because it creates negative tongue weight. Now, negative tongue weight means that at a natural resting state, the front of the trailer wants to be up in the air instead of down on the ground. At highway speeds, this can cause some pretty nasty handling characteristics because the trailer will sway back and forth and can eventually start to pull on the tow vehicle side to side, and you can lose control that way. Now, with a trailer this small, that's really not that big of a deal, but it is annoying because the negative tongue weight also means the nose of the trailer is jumping up and down, and it's jerking on the trailer hitch inside the receiver and making a bunch of noise, and it makes it really just not that fun of a place to be inside the vehicle. The good news is this is all pretty easy to fix. Well, sort of. There's a couple of different ways you can go about handling negative tongue weight, and the easiest of which is to bias your load towards the front of the trailer. Now, you load it all up and you put the heavy stuff up front, and that will kind of push the nose of the trailer down, and you can handle it that way. The second way is to move the balance point of your trailer back so that any load you put on it will lever the nose of the trailer down and do away with this negative tongue weight. So here behind me we have my car hauling trailer. And it's a great example of what we're looking to do when we move the axle on our small trailer. You can see here that the manufacturer put both wheels in the rear third of the trailer, which gives us a way better balancing point. You can kind of see that when you put a car on this thing, all of the weight is over the front half of the trailer because our balancing point is in the rear half of the trailer. And that's going to mean that any weight we put on this thing is going to, since we move the balance point backwards, is going to lever the nose of the trailer down and give us that positive tongue weight that I talked about just a second ago. The thing is, the axle on our little trailer here is so far forward, and the trailer itself is so small that it's nearly impossible to bias any load and forward enough to overcome the bad balancing point that we've been given here. So that means that we need to move this axle. Fortunately, trailers are pretty simple built little things. Moving this axle is not exactly a huge job, it's not exactly a big deal, but there's some fabrication and some stuff here that I personally have never done before. It also takes some pretty precise measuring and a good amount of planning to make sure the axle ends up centered on the trailer, pointed straight, all kinds of stuff like that. Either way, our first step is to get this thing stripped down and up in the air a little bit so that we can get a better look at the job ahead of us.
So as with anything else, the first step is to get this thing up on jack stands up in the air because we're going to have to crawl around under this quite a bit, measuring and taking it apart and doing all sorts of stuff like that. Now, like I said before, trailers are pretty simply built little things. They kind of have to be to stay cheap. Most wood decks like this are held on in a couple of places front to back with studs down through the top and nuts on the bottom, and it's pretty easy to get up under there and zip all those nuts off the bottom. A little bit later on, we're going to have to take the axle off as well. I want to go ahead and get this thing as stripped down as possible so we can go ahead and start measuring and thinking and planning stuff out. But in any case, let's turn on some music and get this thing taken apart.
So now that we got the deck off this thing, we can really get a good look at it and see what we're up against. And man, it is rusty. Now, that's not exactly a surprise. Treated lumber against steel never really works super well. It always rusts things. But what it does mean is that we're probably going to have to buy some new hardware, which is fine. Fortunately, what makes this a good project is part of what makes this such a good project is that so many of these parts are universal. These are just regular U-bolts and leaf springs and shackles, and it's really just not a big deal with the shackles are back there. But it's really just not that big of a deal to replace these things. I can probably get most of this at the local hardware store without too much trouble. So that's kind of what makes this kind of a nice project. Is stuff is easy to get. Now, one thing to note is this is a spring under setup. That is, the spring runs under the axle here. You can see here that the spring runs under the axle's sitting on top of the spring. Now, that doesn't really matter, but I was kind of hoping to flip the spring in the axle to lower the trailer a little bit, because I'm a big nerd and I thought that would be kind of cool, but that's kind of already been done for us. See, when the spring, you can see that if you put the spring on top of the axle, it's going to lift that whole trailer up by more than the diameter of the axle here. But that's already been done, so we're going to have to find some other way to make the trailer look lower. And I've been thinking about it, and I think that we're going to have to cut these fenders off to move the axle anyway. I think we can probably remount the fenders a little bit lower, hug the wheel a little bit better, to make it look lower, and maybe it'll look a little bit better that way. But in any case, what we need to do now is get some measurements. We need to measure where this axle is actually sitting so we can make sure we get it put back in the proper orientation. So, using a touch of that YouTube magic, I've already taken all the measurements that we really need. You don't need to watch me do that, you know how to measure things. But I do want to walk you through what I measured and why I measured it, why it's important. The first thing that we need is the distance between the shackles here. The distance between the leaf spring brackets here. These brackets obviously hold the leaf spring, which holds the axle, and so we need to know how far apart they are so that we can put them back in the correct place when we move this whole thing back. Now, this is a pretty crucial measurement, but it doesn't have to be super precise because this shackle right here As this axle moves up and down, the shackle is going to move forward and backwards. So we have a little bit of that space, a little bit of error in there when we put the thing back on. Now, what is crucial is the distance between the shackle and the front of the trailer and the shackle, the bracket rather, in the back of the trailer. That will tell us where the springs are actually mounted. That's important because it controls thrust angle. Thrust angle is basically which direction the axle is pointed. Because it's a live axle, both sides are connected. The two wheels are directly connected to each other. So it's crucial to get it pointed as straight as possible. If the distance is different between the two, then that means the axle is shifted kind of this way or this way. Now, I've measured a lot of these cheap trailers before, and they're almost never square, and they're almost never pointed a good direction. This one's not far off. It's about 1/8 of an inch driver, which means the axle is pointed by about 1/8 of an inch to the driver's side. It towed fine. I'm not concerned about that. Within 1/8 of an inch is going to be fine. Now, to lower the fenders, we need to make sure that the tires are not going to hit the fenders as we kind of bounce down the road with the load involved here. So what I did, and I don't know if this is right or not, this is what I'm doing, you can see here that eventually the axle can only go so far before it actually hits the trailer. So I measured that distance. It's about 2 inches, 2 3/4 inches. What that means is when we go to put the fenders back on, we can lower them down significantly because there was way more than 2 3/4 inch gap there. So all we need to do is when we lower the fenders is make sure we leave about that same amount, about 2 3/4 inches before the tire hits the thing. So call it 3 inches. The fender will be mounted 3 inches above the tire, and I think that's really all we need. So we know how far apart these spring brackets are, so we can put them back in the right place, and we know where they're positioned on the trailer itself so that we can make sure we get everything pointed in the proper direction. What we need to figure out now is how far back do we really want to move it. To keep the axle from hitting this piece of angle here, this support, we're going to have to move it behind that. Now, this is a pretty crucial moment because we need to make sure we're not moving it too far back. With a trailer this size, I really am not too concerned about having too much tongue weight. I don't really think that's going to be much of an issue. But just kind of eyeballing it here, I think we might end up butting this spring bracket against that back angle iron there. I think that'll give us plenty of move back. But in any case, we don't really need to mess with any of that right now. We just need to get this thing the rest of the way apart. Let's get going. So that's all the time we have for today. We got a really solid start on this thing. I am really excited. It looks very empty, it looks very skeletal right now, and I'm excited by that. We can really start to think and plan our next steps. We have to answer questions like how far back are we going to move the axle? How far down can we move the fenders? How are we going to remount the fenders because they're going to be below this rail, which the manufacturer used to mount, and we can't do that next time. How are we going to make sure we get the axle pointed straight as possible when we put the spring shackles back on? These are all questions that we're going to have to, well, that I'm going to have to start planning and figuring out. I know that this isn't exactly race cars, but I think it's a lot of fun nonetheless, at least for me. It includes my other hobby, which is motorcycles apparently, and as this thing will eventually carry that motorcycle and some others. But in any case, in the next video we're going to start by chopping off these fenders and chopping off those spring brackets, and we can really get into some destruction and reconstruction of this little trailer. Let me know what you guys are working on. I'd love to see what you guys are working on. I'd also love to know what you think about this project here. It's a bit silly, I know, but a project like this is a great way to pick up new skills and hone skills that you've already got. So that excites me. I like to weld. I like to think and plan building things like this. So I think it's going to be really good. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching. You can find me in between these videos on Instagram at The.Daily.Racer. I'm always active there, posting stuff between videos and everything, what I'm doing on a daily basis and what have you. In any case, thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one.